According to the Bible, love never fails.
Love never fails, that's right. So I'd like to talk about, in the next 30 minutes, what bioethics' love of life means for life, the evolution of reflections on transdisciplinary bioethics in Asia. And for the first time, for a long time, I'm not using a PowerPoint, I'm using a paper. Societies and the social systems that emerge in the communities of individuals are not static. Despite romantic images of literature or film that are often quoted to depict an epitaph of a nation, the images portrayed are snapshots, or selfies, if you are used to taking selfies in modern terms. The journey to get to find the image is also an evolutionary one. Considering a famous work of John Steinbeck, Travels with Charlie in Search of America, we can ask, to what extent did he find America? If you know John Steinbeck, his home was in Salinas, California. His museum is there, and you can see his caravan, which he spent 1 year when he was dying, traveling with his dog around America to try and find the image of what was America. So can we ask, did he actually find America? What is America? Of course, it's much more varied than the already great diversity of the United States of America. The same is true of any community, especially a complex one. Societies evolve and are transformative to not only the persons within the society, but also to the social systems themselves. Even nations which pride themselves to be more homogeneous, such as Japan, are incredibly diverse societies that are subject to constant process of mondialization. Mondialization is the process by which, when we come in touch with another person or another culture, we take something of them onto ourselves. It's the same sense that why you can eat sushi in London, or why you can eat baguettes in Japan. You can have the mondialization of food. You can have mondialization of other things as well. In a sense, so societies are self-evolutionary constructions of knowledge and a fusion of biological, social, and spiritual systems that shape our existence, taking pieces of wisdom from all around the world. In this paper, I reflect on the evolution of bioethics as a concept and as the foundation of our world. I will propose that such evolution is likely to be just as much circular as linear. And we've heard about circles in essence. And I've got the window open because I wanted to show the tree. I love momochi, it's one of my favorite plants. I actually grew some by seeds when I used to live in Ibaraki. And you see the cycle of nature in the seasons, don't you? It grows from a seed, it makes seeds every year, the leaves change, and eventually it will die. And the cycle will begin from its seeds. So that way is love. So I like the evolution of life is in the cycles. So in that sense, if we think of cycles, there's a contrast between some of the religious views of a cycle of life, which are linear. For example, ensoulment. It's a common concept in Judeo-Christian Islamic thinking, that you are conceived, a new genome comes into being, an embryo, an egg, you have a soul that's created, and then at the end of life, your soul will die, or your body will die, and you'll go to heaven. Or maybe your soul will, or you may go to hell, or something like that. It's a one-way linear process. But it's actually, this seems rather contrary to the phenomenon that we have of life, which is the circle. Life is a circle of from birth to death and birth to death. We see it in reproduction, we see it in generations. So in the evolution of countries and societies, are we circular or linear? Okay, so do we work from a circle, or do we go in one way? So now let's think about our reflection, because my title includes the word reflection. What is reflection? The process of questioning ourselves, our relationships, our identity, and the meaning of our life can be called reflection. In the normal process of the ontological development of Homo sapiens, the capacity for deep self-reflection is obvious by the early teenage years in the questions that children ask themselves. Most 10, 11, or 12-year-olds start already to ask questions. Now, if they've been in a reasonable environment, that's what they do. They start to read literature, they start to read questions and ask about themselves. Who are they? So this deeper reflective gaze into our mind is years after the normal time when we become self-aware of our own reflection in a mirror, or the self-aware looking at an image in the stream underwater. We start to ask what's behind the reflection. So you can get young children and many animals to look at themselves. I come from New Zealand. When I grew up, we had 25 sheep per human being. And so 1 in 25 sheep believes they're human beings. We used to joke, maybe that's true, I'm a sheep. And even sheep can look at themselves and see their self-reflection. And what's also interesting is when sheep look at sheep faces, they see individuals. And when sheep look at human beings, they see they're all the same. And when human beings look at human beings, they see them as all different, human beings. And when we look at sheep, they all look like sheep, the same. So we're used to finding our identity and in what's important to us. But our reflection is deeper than that. A number of other animals experience the process of self-reflection and can recognize themselves in a mirror. We're not sure how many other species participate in the process of self-reflection in terms of asking questions of their identity. We know they can recognize their own identity, but do they ask questions? This is a question for future research. We have seen some other species paint art, whether they're elephants or chimpanzees, but we've only been able to communicate well enough with chimpanzees to know that at least some of them pose questions of self-reflection. And when I have an elephant painting. We come from Thailand. There's many elephants who are trained to paint. And are they doing self-reflection, especially when they're looking at writing, drawing portraits and other things? It's quite interesting as a question. At the same time, not all human beings show signs that they actually reflect deeply on their own existence. It is a widespread and known in some form in every human community that we have had the pleasure to meet. In communities which have a written language and literature, we can see numerous writings from around the world which illustrate a deep philosophy. Those writings are convenient materials for scholars of bioethics and a norm for academic literature. It can be called a paper chase, the perpetual and relentless reading, quoting, copying, and writing and discussions of a growing body of literature. Some of you are engaged in already, looking at your smartphones or your computers, trying to write another few words on a paper, or an email, or a chase of paper. Are we actually reflecting when we're writing this, or not? Gradually, we've seen the emergence of academic journals in the field of bioethics, such as the Bias Journal of Asian International Bioethics, which is now in the 28th year, joined by several other regional journals, and there's about 50 journals in the world on bioethics. So we have an academic discipline and people can contribute to the paper chase. On the other hand, the routine daily activities of many persons in the world apparently take us away from the desire to be reflective. We may be forced to work hard to earn enough money to pay for a house, for food, and taxes. And some of us don't like to pay taxes. Who likes to pay taxes? We were talking before about a person who became very famous the last couple of weeks in Japan who didn't want to pay taxes, even though he has more money than some governments do. So this is just a reflection. Maybe he doesn't work very hard. Many minds are distracted by the rise of many addictive games. If the programs on television fail to act as a sufficient mind control agent, not losing the analogy between the programming of a computer and the programming of human beings to live in each society, not causing too many ripples. Conscious bioethical decision-making may only appear at certain crises in our life, like an unwanted pregnancy, a serious disease, a fatal car accident, a disaster or a war or an apocalypse. Arguably, we can still call these mundane life choices as a form of bioethics, perhaps practical and programmed rather than reflective. My thinking on bioethics has been most influenced by deliberate choices to enter into dialogue with other beings over my entire life. For over 40 years, I've had the pleasure to be reflecting on my own existence through writing, music, painting, viewing art, reading, writing, playing, laughing, crying, listening to thousands of other persons. Part of this process has been several hundred bioethics conferences and roundtables, including the precious ones in Kumamoto, over the past 12 years. Let's think about transdisciplinary. I define bioethics as the love of life. It's deliberately ambiguous. My view that bioethics is broader than any definition is also shared by the absence of agreement of any definition of bioethics in the Universal Declaration on Bioethics and Human Rights. Although there were attempts at definitions in various drafts of the international instrument, there was no consensus possible between the experts and governments of countries in the document, so there's no definition. The subject matter of bioethics is most commonly depicted as including environmental ethics and medical ethics. Although practitioners of bioethics may often focus on one or the other, even within each field there is diversity. We need to explore bridges between these and other fields, including public health ethics, gene ethics, applied ethics of science and technology. Beyond the content of bioethics, the research methodology of bioethics includes those associated with numerous fields of bioethics, including anthropology, sociology, philosophy, psychology, law, biology, anthropology, political science, all sorts of things. The inherent transdisciplinary nature of bioethics is attractive to many scholars who are tired of narrow-minded approaches, of many reductionist approaches to knowledge. Bioethics is both emotional and rational, and something that all persons do. We can see the emergence of cultural norms, laws, and individual choices in a multi-layered approach to analyze bioethics. One of the most interesting questions in transdisciplinary bioethics is whether there is a particular discipline which is more suited to the methodology of descriptive bioethics, or prescriptive bioethics, or interactive bioethics. For sociologists who study society, one of the basic joys is looking at how do we understand each other, and how do we understand the way different communities set norms and standards. What are the virtues in one society? What is our image of love or life? Are you in love? Do you love life? You are alive, even though you may be silent. But love. What is the joy? What is the sorrow? Are our virtual actions the same as actions considered virtuous by another life? Although there are a number of theories that have been used to describe societies, it's still an open book as to which works best in each of the over 4,000 communities around the world. Evolution of religion. One of the ways that evolution of bioethics has occurred is through the sharing of religious concepts between countries. Across Asia, we can see a variety of expressions of Islam, Christianity, Hinduism, Buddhism, and Confucian values with animistic foundations that may be earlier, such as Shinto in Japan. Over the past millennia, there have also been importation and exportation of Western values both into Asia and out of Asia. It's no coincidence that the dominant religions of the world today were all developed in Asia. But it does not mean that they were any superior to the religions that developed in Americas or Africa. Merely that Asian religions such as Christianity and Islam were associated with aggressive colonization. Yes, we should remember that Christianity and Islam are Asian religions, and they've both been very aggressive in terms of colonization of the world. Although their agents of colonization included many Europeans after it was exported to Europe. Informed consent is also becoming accepted. Bioethics is part of a transition that is transforming society from a paternalistic society to an individualistic one. It can be traced to human rights discourse as well as to dialogues on religious freedom and self-determination. Evolution of demographic structures in public health. The bioethics story is further complicated by the intergenerational nature of relationships between people. The population demographics of societies change over time. In the past, there were large numbers of younger persons, and fewer persons survived until old age. And as we now have an evolution of societies to more older people. Evolution of technology. Technology developed through innovation, which leads to technological evolution. Modern Western medicine took hold in Asia in the 19th century. The rapid progress of medical technologies has led to transformation in the way that medicine is practiced, as well as to changes in what is considered to be ethical communication systems. The existing systems and patterns that are seen in the relationships between patients, families, health professionals, and society in general changed as paternalism diminished. At the same time, as technology is transferred between communities, some values are also imported beyond the general acceptance that new technology must be better than old. Information technology, smartphones, personal computers, bank accounts for all persons, education for all, have transformed the choices that people make. All persons are taught to be financially responsible for their choices. This is also part of the evolution towards informed choices. Technology that promotes individual choice, from private transportation systems, such as the automobile, to shopping malls, to online shopping, are technologies that affect our values. New technology is shaping our values in a way that we relate to machines, and even in the way that we write books, or the way we paint paintings, or write and sing songs. We can even reproduce a relaxing occasion with the advent of virtual reality. So in 40 years' time, somebody can reproduce from our videotape and record a virtual reality impression of this room and this experience that we had together. This will be interesting. A virtual bioethics roundtable revisiting the old and possibly creating artificial intelligence machines to be able to interact in a way that we have. We know the responses of certain people already after 12 years as to how they're going to respond to certain questions. So maybe we are going to be all programmed in the end. But we can't just transfer technology and expect it to be free of values. So for example, one cannot simply expect to transfer a machine gun or a warplane to another community without also expecting that a new user will assume it's okay to kill using the guns. One of the great things people gave when colonizing is, we're going to trade some of your land and gold and give you a gun, so you can go and shoot your enemies. Okay? So that became a common aspect. And the leaders of the world, the countries who have veto power in the UN, are the largest arms suppliers in the world. So therefore, since they sell arms, it's okay to use them. So how would I, for example, if I'm a country fighting a war, and I'm buying the arms from you, and on one side of this country is saying, stop the war, but the other hand of the country is saying, here, buy some more fighter planes, some more bombs, some more rockets, please buy more. So, the two hands of the same country, we can see what's really interested. They're interested in selling weapons. So technology then is interesting. I talk a bit about the evolution of Japanese bioethics and organ transplantation. Evolution in human research subject protection is also another issue, which I think we have to reflect on. Since the 1970s, people have become more conscious of rights to informed consent, which can be attributed to the importation of civil rights movements that occurred in the USA and Japan in the 1960s. Most hospitals in Asia have some poster to explain what are patient rights and policies to work against paternalism. A black episode in Japanese medical ethics is the World War II experiments conducted on prisoners in Manchuria, China, while China was under Japanese occupation. So we had Unit 731 and many issues here. But the same has occurred in other countries. What is interesting is in the year 2000, still a few Japanese or Chinese bioethicists had looked hard at these experiments. So we explored a number of issues in papers in the year 2000 and trying to look at what was the reflection on why could people do these experiments. We now have the construction of institutional review boards and ethics committees to try and protect people. We have a diversity of views in Asia. I've done a lot of opinion surveys, and you can find references to these. So, I want to talk about, at the end, the circles of evolution. So, we talk about evolution often in a linear sense, as I explained. The term bioethics has had an effect to stimulate cultures around the world to think about the relationships between patient and practitioner, as well as between the public and the government. One reaction that is seen in Japan in the 1990s from the introduction of Western medical ethics in the 1980s, particularly from the United States, has been a backlash to claim that Japanese are different from Westerners. This can be used to defend existing practices and also as an anchor to try and slow down the rapid social change. We have seen the development of the Asian Bioethics Association as one attempt to break with the domination of US bioethics. In the 1997 UNESCO Asian Bioethics Conference, there was discussion by a number of Asian researchers of the need for recognition of bioethics of traditional Asia rather than importing bioethics from the USA or Europe. There's also been discussion of whether the idea of fundamental human rights is compatible with an Asian ethos. The involvement of a family means that some modern Western textbook ideas on autonomy and confidentiality are not accepted in Asian medical practice. A family may be told medical news earlier than a patient. Modern Asia, however, is more individualistic than it used to be, and patient rights are being promoted by many persons, so medical ethics is in a transition phase, which is not able to really be separated from broader socioeconomic changes. The late 20th century has been a rapid evolution of the concept of how a person is integrated into the family and the boundaries of the family one deals with. The evolution of the concept of patient autonomy then is a trend that's reflected in all Asian cultures, in a movement from paternalistic compassion and love towards informed decision-making. The situation is not so simple to claim that in the past people did not have autonomy, and that physicians always acted paternalistically. The sick may prefer to leave the decisions up to others, or use subtle linguistic expressions to convey their will, as seen in languages in general. However, there's still a hierarchical social system which makes it difficult for patient and doctor to be truly at an equal level in their relationship. Even more so, the concept of informed choice, where the patient becomes the consumer of medicine, is only seen in the pharmacy stores, but not in the medical consultation. Many sick persons are afraid to be a bother or burden to others, so they attempt to avoid trouble that could occur if they clearly express their will and is different from the doctors or from others. So importantly, I'd like to argue that the evolution of individualism and communitarian systems are not linear, but circular. We can see the circles of evolution of societies between those that are guided more by love, for example, a situation ethics system, and those that are governed by strict law and regulations. However, we can only test this hypothesis over a long time period, since currently many countries seem to be headed towards individualism. However, we can see even large developing countries such as Thailand and India shifting to publicly supported healthcare systems, which is a communitarian bioethical structure based on the application of justice. Unless we reproduce, we will not have a subsequent generation. This is a fundamental requirement of a society to evolve. Overall birth rates in most countries in Asia have fallen to more sustainable rates. In some countries, such as Japan, will decrease the population over the coming decades. Self-determination is a norm and accepted part of reproductive rights. With contraception, abortion, and assisted reproductive technology, popular choices that persons and couples across Asia have widespread access to. Asia is somewhat more liberal than Latin America and Africa as a region in permitting persons to exercise their reproductive liberty. Where is Asian bioethics heading? Assuming that we see evolution of bioethics, is this random change or chaos, or does it have some logic? The key turning point issue for bioethics in Japan was the unprecedented social debate over the law to allow organ transplants from brain-dead donors. It's rare to see a debate between the public and policymakers over any issue, but this issue led to the introduction of informed consent and the need for medical policy to be more sensitive to public concerns. And this debate led to a broader, further transition from paternalism to informed consent to informed choice in many spheres of life. And we could call this a broad bioethical transformation. So bioethics debate was a catalyst required to transform Japan from a paternalistic democracy to something with more participation. Evolution of bioethics does not mean introduction of laws and regulations will be more likely. Although we can see the adoption of some laws against the surrogacy trade in Thailand and India, for example, it does not mean that human rights are being better protected. Promoting greater bioethical maturity and responsibility for our bioethical decision-making through education is more effective to evolve social morality than laws. When Asia opened its doors, and usually these doors were forced open rather than voluntarily opened, to Western society, it led to the introduction of a newly emerged science and scientific paradigm, only part of the fabric of Western society. Meanwhile, Western society has continued to evolve, also adopting some aspects from Asia, and bioethics has emerged. Part of this development includes importing and developing ethical approaches which can be debated, but its more important part is the involvement of the public in discussion and development of the indigenous diversity of ethical traditions. We can evolve together. And I think importantly, we're on part of this circle of evolution towards more public involvement. But we can see some countries which are coming on the other side of a circle coming back, involving less public participation. So a large country to the west of here is going back to a more authoritarian regime, okay, than it used to be. For a while it was opening a little. But we see this circle of evolution between communitarian and individualistic. So I'd like to invite your comments. I think the concept of the evolution and social progress is interesting. My paper also has implications for economic theories. If you imagine that economics is always linear and getting better and better and better, I think you're living in a dream. We are living in cycles. And that's what history tells us. There are cycles. That's the nature of life and the nature of human progress is through cycles. Are we going to enter a golden age or are we leaving a golden age? This is a question that you can think about. Thank you very much.
I think it's a very interesting paper because I think in the last 10 years we used a PowerPoint or bullet point, just a figurative types of representation, but this is a real interesting paper. And then I think when I introduce you, I've used the biblical calling that love never fails. Yeah. But interestingly, you find yes, love in the long run never fails. Okay. In the short run, there are some conditional issue you also mentioned in your paper, namely the technology, the diversity at the same time. But the more interesting thing is not just diversity, but differentiation, namely how the diversity goes into differences as shaped by either the structure of the government, the ideology. You also mentioned something about populism, one thing about moving back to a more individualistic idea of we have to protect ourselves by whatever means, including building another biggest human wall to stop someone coming in or out, and trying to be assertive, something maybe more regressive than progressive. Interestingly, you also mentioned perhaps the same applied to in the morning discussion about Taoism. It seems that we have certain certainty that either the development or cyclic or in some form of shape we can track the trajectory of the growth or the rise and the rise or the fall. But would it be the case that there are certain things, if love is eventually never fail, would that be the case that when you talk about the movement of certain development in terms of rise or fall, in terms of the cycling, of coming back, and you mentioned about the Momeiji, and then you mentioned about the human civilization, but in fact the technology, or super technology nowadays seems to be changing if there's certainty of certain form of trajectory we understand, namely cyclic, because eventually if the super text or the hyper developmental momentum all the way from the macro one, climate change, or the micro one or nano one, nanotech or the gene, it seems to be the technological development developed in a way that the assumption that we have certainties about whether in the whole year we've got, in the classic case, the lunar calendar, you've got 24 differences, so-called what they call different period, just like seasonal change, and they will return eventually. Yeah, and that's the interesting part. It's also mentioned about, I think the news, you read the news that the trees in Tokyo that it will never go, there are no leaf, the leaf was there, so we had a warm winter. In a way that it stopped. And that would be the case that if and when, and then we are now witnessing this week that seems to be a human being, in fact, technologically can be making themselves in such a way that they can, even before the life begins, they can start the engineering, or they can start the process of changing not just the life course of certain genes, but also the life course of certain developmental mode of humanities. That someone could be live forever. So there's no such thing called death and dying. Long life humanity. Long life, not humanity, long life something. I cannot say humanity, because humanity, you also mentioned clearly that humanity has birth and death. If something is not is forever, and then what next? And then it's an interesting question. In a way, it's coupled with not just the interesting about diversity of the Asian culture, but also the differentiation, namely different unit, how they take the opportunity of the technological so-called hope. If you got the technology, we will move on something tremendously wonderful world. And that's interesting in a way. Yes, we have quite a bit of diversity, and then diversity meaning you have to respect differences. You have to accept weakness as well as strength. It seems we are moving into much more predominant, stronger, bigger, and more, more not so equal in a way. We're trying to be a predator, so to speak, to be getting something out of nothing. The way how we treat the animal in the last 100 years, the way we treat each other seems we need to win to get something. And that's interesting in a way, particularly in terms of progress, in terms of the so-called progress or regression, depends which way you take. I think would that be the case that the technology and the structure of the development or will redefine the contours of love, namely how we see love. Eventually, we never fail, but would that be different forms of love to be bought or sold, or to be bought or to be sold in a way? Yeah. It's interesting, even for some development, if Mr. Trump or Mr. Xi, they talk about love of your country, something, okay. It's interesting. I think the rest we can have the respond.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, so love never fails. Yes, I agree. I agree love never fails. The answer, the reason why I agree love never fails is because in the broader perspective, everything is a destiny of what will happen.
Yeah.
So, therefore it never fails. Even an apocalypse is not a failure. If we talk in terms of a cosmological cycle, we have a big crunch and a big bang at the end and the beginning of our universe. So therefore, in that cycle, love never fails. We have a big crunch and then we have a big bang. We start again. But I do think it also, love never fails in terms of the relational aspect. In the end, love will conquer. The idea of regression or progress is is quite central as well. So, if we imagine a circle, maybe I should stand up while talking. If we imagine a circle, then if I'm doing in a circle, you might think that progress is in this direction, and then when I come back to the beginning, is that regression. But if it's a proper circle, and a revolving circle, it's not regression, everything is progress. But it progresses back to the beginning again, and starts again. So for example, nowadays some people are buried in England, they're buried to plant a tree into their body, to go back to nature, which is a much more ecological way. We have green cemeteries where bodies are not put in coffins, but bodies are put in the garden, and you plant a tree, and the tree can grow on your body. So that's going back to nature. because our body can feed the worms and feed the planet, that's going back. That's the ecological cycle. So that's quite reasonable, like the cycles of the Japanese maple leaves or the reproduction, and that's a norm. We live in a cycle. When we break the cycle, that's when we have a problem. So I think that is, everything is progress, it's not regression. Some societies, however, if they violate progress in human rights or individual expression or bioethics, that is repressive, that is regression. But we are going to have eventually cycles where governments will become more legalistic and then at some point give more freedom. I hope that our newly gained freedoms of human rights and expression and self-determination will not be lost too quickly. But however history tells us, they will be lost eventually. We'll make a mistake and we're going to lose it, and then it's going to go through a cycle. That's the scenario of history. So I think, and this, is it wrong that at the end of life, what would happen if you live forever? Immortality? It's interesting because it's a philosophical, religious concept, a theological concept that people have included into their religions. Okay, I'm Christian, so okay, when I die I go to heaven and live forever. Very interesting. Yeah? I actually prefer to be reincarnated as a long-lasting tree, though I might become a worm or a butterfly, it could be nice, or a sakura leaf, a flower that lasts for a few days and goes. But it's interesting that our theology has not really explored too much. Maybe it's my lack of in-depth understanding of this, but I've certainly thought that sometimes it seems too boring to live forever in heaven. Surely it would be nice to change species like the Hindu system where I can go through 80,000 species and come back again. That's sort of more interesting, isn't it? Because you can get to experience what it's like to be a maple tree or a rock or a caterpillar, okay? Or a table or a chair. If we're really cosmocentric, my atoms will come back to be part of the chair. There you go. I'd like, any other questions or comments for anyone?
Love is free, you can ask any question.
Questions are free.
Thank you. When you are talking about the cycling, does it mean you're coming back to exactly the same point, or is it more in the kind of spiral? What is your image?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question too. I think the spirals may eventually come back to the same point. But it's interesting because you could have a spiraling, like spirals of education or learning different concepts, spirals of social development, where countries gradually experiment and then get to some point that's better than it was initially as a caveman. But when I was a caveman, maybe I enjoyed to be in nature and play with the energy fields of the planet, and now I can come back to it. Wonderful. But still, there are some things which I enjoy, such as a heater, or a blanket, or my laptop, or being able to talk languages with different people and communicate. So we may come back, but it's probably not going to be the same point. Yeah, that's a good point. Yes?
Small question. Particularly, Christian-based concept of life is linear. The Christianity follow the linear lifestyle. On the other hand, Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism is very much inclined by the life sense of cyclical. The life is starting from not from somewhere. there is no ending of life because it has no starting point. But the westernized Christianity influenced West belief the life is linear. There is some starting point and there is some ending point. Okay, you know, most of the philosophical and conceptual thought are biased in West by the influence of Christianity, particularly Bible. But on the other hand, the Eastern thought is influenced by either Hinduism or Buddhism or their ethnic belief. So in that case, if the Eastern people are doing bioethics and the Western peoples are doing bioethics may be different from this background or perspective. So how can we reconcile these two different outlooks in a common place?
Thank you. I have two main replies to you. One is the Buddhist concept of nirvana, that we escape from the cycles, is a one-way street because you finish. So actually there is a concept of nirvana at the end of Hinduism and Buddhism. So we have cycles and then at the end we end. What's interesting to me is the beginning. How do we begin? If we're having some people ending, then where do the new souls come from? Interesting question. But the second thing is, these cycles tend to be much longer in the process. So in terms of the daily relationships and with the seasons and development of the seasons of agriculture, forestry and food and climate, these are everywhere, whether you're Eastern or Western or Southern or Northern, because you can't escape from the season. So the cycles are there, and then in terms of our relationship of society, these also exist. So I think in terms of let's say the microbioethics of daily, in most people's lifetime, not going to be too substantial, but in terms of our deeper cosmological philosophy, it is a difference. And it does make a difference, but if you believe it's all cycles, then it's like the first talk this morning from Nada on Taoism. If we're going to go with the flow of nature, then that's the flow of nature. And we're going to accept it more, because dust comes to dust. Everything will come back, and that is actually also found in so-called Western. In fact, but as I said, Christianity and Islam are Asian religions, so they're not Western, they're Asian. In the foundation of them.
Okay. Can I ask another question? So,
Yeah? Yes, okay, as a chair.
yeah,
Let's give me the mic.
okay, thank you. So you know, there is a Asian value controversy that was led by Singapore Prime Minister's Wang Lee. Asian values controversy. But his thesis is that the Asian values is seriously communitarian, but the Western values is not like that. So if we take our political decisions or decisions about policy or anything else, that should be biased by the communitarian values. But the Western peoples, our Western political thought are not biased by any sort of communitarian values. So if we consider the league-wide considerations of value controversy, so how can we face the possibility of global bioethics?
So, in fact, he's famously, Kuan Yu is famous, I think, for saying Asian values are universal values, because they are common. But they actually, if we look in terms of the bioethics policy, social welfare systems, the construction of social welfare is the expression of communitarianism. Where do we see the most developed social welfare systems and social support and social safety nets? Actually in Western Europe and Australia and New Zealand, in these so-called Western countries. And now, of course, you could say the family structures were in the East or Africa were trying to take care of it, but it's still Confucian circles, that you're actually in circles of only people next to your family you're taking care of, not the vulnerable outside. So actually I think there is a contradiction, despite the textbook ethics of the United States, which might be individualistic. Even in their country, they have a strong social support mechanism to some degree, better than some other countries. So that solidarity principle is still there. That the Western Europe is clearly has the best social safety support systems. People are paying taxes for the totals of strangers to look after their lives. So that's communitarianism. So I think we actually, this is a false dichotomy. Yeah. Okay.
Great, we have a good start, and we'll continue this one, and then the next presenter and the next chair discussion will be picking up the mic. Yeah.